think of ourselves as the most powerful beings in the universe, it's unsettling to discover that we're wrong. Time has come to see the world as it is.
Can we pull back the veil of static and reach into the source of all being? Behind this curtain lies this random pattern generator. You will be responsible for an escalation that will destroy everything.
In this episode, I will continue to read journal entries. July 8th, 2017. What I'm about to talk about here may seem quite frightening, though keep in mind that our modern, Western mainstream culture has a very childish and nearly puritanical view of what we call good and evil. Having said that, years ago I conquered and integrated a god of nightmares. I had not yet thought of thanking one of the deities I work with until I first played Resident Evil 7 and was shocked and impressed by its nightmarish accomplishments. I then went to a private room, away from the other spirits, called him, and thanked him for the gift of nightmare in my life, which was Resident Evil 7. I didn't really expect anything, but suddenly there were concentric circles of energy swirling around me, which then converged on me and became one with me. When I asked my guide about it, he said that I was given a gift, a power. He also said that the gift was not something that would give me nightmares, but something beneficial to me. A couple of days later, I saw Alien Covenant and was also very shocked and impressed by its nightmare power. I thanked that deity again and waited for the concentric circles of energy, but they didn't come. I was about to leave when a force took my arm and led me forward. I then felt a humanoid form appear in front of me and then walk right through me, leaving a shadow of itself inside me. This was another gift. June 20th, 2017. I often walk around a mall that is very close to me. While I was doing that the other day, I saw a decoration up on the wall, which was a band of colors going through the spectrum. For some reason, I intuitively thought, I can do something with that. So I sat down and stared at it. After a couple of minutes, I began to feel a bit phased out. When I stopped and got up, everything in my vision was very clear and detailed, and I felt euphoric. That was interesting. Something else I felt in that mall and other public places is that I can sort of stretch myself out and become one with the building. I then feel that all the people in the building are now mine. It's hard to describe, but I can feel myself enveloping them all. It is something which my guide told me not to do, as it could be harmful to others. He tells me that the next step in that process would be for me to sap the vital energy out of all those people, essentially vampirizing them on a massive level. July 17th, 2017. I believe I've already mentioned that each night when I invoke, I leave powered up and unplugged game systems out for the spirits to drain the energy from to aid them in extracting parasites from me, and sometimes even doing little acts of poltergeist activity. On some nights, the energy will drain over a matter of hours, and some nights they will be utterly drained in under an hour, depending on how much the spirits have utilized them. As an aside, last night, they even drained my phone, which was far from being out of power. The other night, they used the energy for a little poltergeist event. I heard a crash in the kitchen and found that some things on my sink countertop had been moved. I have an African carving of a group of people all interlocked in each other's arms next to my sink, and on top of it, I have an action figure that is a sort of devil-looking fellow. I created a protector spirit, a mind form to be more specific, which is a kind of spirit robot, which is tied to that toy, and gave it a name. It is the fierce protector of my kitchen. The African carving had been pulled out from under the toy, and then pushed ajar into the sink. This definitely was not the toy falling over, or off in any way. The heavy carving was pulled out away from the wall. My spirit said that one of them had done it, because they said that the carving had a nasty spirit attached to it, so they were telling me to get rid of it. As much as I hate throwing this thing away, they tell me not to give it to anyone else, as that would just be screwing them over. November 7th, 2017. I was just at the local Quick Trip, a place my spirit guide told me to never go to, because I had a coupon for a free coffee. While there, I felt extremely awful essences, and something I can only refer to as evil. When I was putting cream in the coffee, a stack of cups flew off the counter and across the room. It was definitely a poltergeist event. When I left, one of my spirits said that they did it, to tell me to get the hell out of there as soon as possible. So damn. Put QT up there with Movie Trading Company on my list of places with a surprisingly terrible energy. A friend of mine asked, so all of them, or just that one in particular? I'm interested to know if they gave you any feedback or ideas as to what the energy was or why it was. And I answered, it's the whole QT franchise. When I asked more about it, they agreed that it is because of the detached, soulless atmosphere of the place. How impersonal it is, and how, because of that, it carries a very strong essence of death. Also because they are putting a lot of privately run corner stores out of business. They say that Movie Trading Company is nasty because so many of the things being sold there are stolen goods. September 25th, 2017. I drink boxed wine, let's get that out of the way. The other morning, I found the spigot for a box of wine on the floor right under my current box of wine, which still had the spigot on it. In order for that to happen, someone would have to dig into my trash, take the wine bag out, and tear the spigot out of the bag. The trash was undisturbed. I took one of the bags out and tried to pry the spigot off, but I couldn't. When I asked my spirits about it, they said that one of them did it, and that it was meant to give me an indication that they wanted me to stop drinking as much as I do. When I recently got my blood work back from my latest doctor's visit, they told me that I need to drink less.
What the hell in God's name is going down here?
In Normal, Illinois, a man claims to have seen a flying humanoid. The anonymous man said on Monday that he was outside his home in McLean County getting ready to watch the Taurid meteor shower last November at around 12 a.m. when the unidentified being showed up. I turned out the lights in the house so it would get dark, he wrote. I waited for about 5 or 10 minutes and I saw my first fireball. The man then said he grabbed a comfortable chair and a soft drink and sat there expecting to see more. But I only saw 1 or 2 small ones. He was reportedly about to lose interest in the annual astronomical event and go back inside the house when he suddenly noticed something coming toward him. Couldn't make out what it was. Not knowing what it was or what to expect, I started to get a better look at this thing, but my eyes and mind wouldn't let me accept what I was seeing. It glided straight over my porch with roof, so I jumped up and ran to south end of porch, waiting for it to come on over there. The Illinoisan, who claims he regularly pilots a small piston-powered aircraft, said the strange object was about 20 feet wide and that it had something hanging down underneath. It had no lights, made no noise, seemed to be gliding. I can judge pretty well how high something is, and by judging with that, if it were a plane, I could have read the numbers on it, he said. I could see it. It seemed to adjust for gliding, but had no known propulsion. It stayed even keel, same elevation, same speed, same direction. He went on to say that what he initially believed to be a flying object was actually some sort of entity. But, he added, the humanoid, which he compared to the Mothman creature, didn't have a head. I could see the legs and dark brown wings, he explained. The Mothman, a ghostly winged humanoid, was reportedly first seen on November 12, 1966 in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. The original report stated that 5 men were digging a grave at the local cemetery when they spotted the cryptid. 3 days later, 2 different couples reported seeing a flying human with red glowing eyes chasing their vehicles. In Mirpur, Pakistan, a 10-year-old child reportedly saw a dinosaur-like bird. His older brother, an England resident who asked to remain anonymous, told Cryptozoology News that they were on a family trip in Pakistan when the young boy spotted the creature in the streets of Mirpur. I didn't see it. My brother says it flew by really fast, he told Cryptozoology News. He said it came out of nowhere. According to his sibling, the child described the animal as a big, orange, featherless bird that looked like a pterosaur. He said it also had a reptilian tail and a crest, but it flew by so quick it disappeared within 5 seconds or so. Reports of unidentified birds were numerous last year. In Orange County, California, a resident said she saw a small man-like creature on Ortega Highway 74 and that it attacked a man living in the area. Amber, who provided a last name but it was omitted for anonymity purposes, said she was heading to Lake Elsinore from work when she drove upon the creature back in May. It was raining and I turned my brights on, she told Thomas Markham. It was in the middle of the road and turned its body in my direction. The small humanoid then reportedly ran across the road and disappeared in the woods. The sighting lasted 10 seconds, she explained. Amber said the creature was about 1 or 2 feet tall and that it was dark-colored like the trees. I couldn't see eyes. She claims she is now trying to obtain video evidence of the creature with a dash cam and that, in her most recent investigation, she found out that a man in the area had apparently been attacked by a similar being. So I stopped by at the Ortega Highway candy store and found out there was another sighting, she said. A sheep herder kept hearing something in his trash cans 3 nights in a row. As the man grabbed his shotgun and went out to determine the source of the ruckus, a small man climbed up to the shepherd's face and scratched it, she reports. He shot at it and hit it, but it kept on running. Shannon and Kelly, who work at the candy store, both thought he was on something, until I came in last week with a similar story. They said he moved away. Amber says she wants to keep investigating and that she is planning a hike to the Ortega Falls in Lake Elsinore. She believes the nocturnal creature could be living in some cave deep in the forest. An English teacher in Kyoto, Japan, claims he encountered a humanoid creature just outside the former capital. Toriki Watanabe, 36, told Cryptozoology News on Thursday that the encounter occurred in the Kyoto prefecture at 10 p.m. November 30th. I was driving from Tokyo to Kyoto for my brother's wedding. I decided to drive at night so I can spend more time with family during day, he said. I am stopping at small shop by side of the road. There is some surrounding forest. I am standing around near shop smoking a cigarette and looking into the forest, he added. Watanabe says that he then noticed a figure shaped like a man about 200 feet away. I call out and have no reply. The creature is slightly hidden by trees. It turns around and begins to walk away, but not in a human-like way. 40 seconds later, says Watanabe, the mysterious figure is out of sight. The eyewitness described the creature as a 6-foot-tall humanoid covered in gray skin, slightly muscular, and with a slouched posture. No visible garment worn. It was hunched over, dragging feet along the ground. The face was obscured by the trees, he claims, adding that the creature had a faint yellow or white light coming from behind it, just around its lower back. Watanabe believes he came across a shirime, a Japanese folklore creature referenced by artist Yosa Nobusan with his yokai painting collection in the 1700s. The story states that a samurai had first found it while walking at night on his way to Kyoto. It is considered a mischievous creature that enjoys startling people, says Zach Davison, a translator and scholar of Japanese folklore and author of Yurei, the Japanese Ghost. A series of humanoid encounters have been reportedly taking place in Asia during the past few months. In Cooksville, Maryland, on a Friday evening in 1973, after law classes at the University of Baltimore, Mike Shea headed towards Olney to meet a friend at 7 p.m. About 15 miles outside of Baltimore, Shea looked to his left and saw a beam of light strike a barn 150 feet from his car. Hovering in the air was a huge object with a ring of alternating red and yellow lights. It was unlike anything the veteran had ever seen in Vietnam. His car window was open and the object made no sound. When the beam of light died out, Shea became fearful. He felt something coming up behind him. Suddenly, he saw the object overhead and felt an electric current running down his spine. The next thing Shea knew, he was approaching Olney and felt quite relaxed. When he arrived at the bar, his friend was nowhere in sight. The bartender told Shea that his friend had been there at 7 p.m. Shea looked up at the clock. It was 9 o'clock p.m. A decade later, the Washington lawyer decided to undergo hypnosis to resolve the lingering uneasiness and fear associated with that episode of missing time. During regressive hypnosis with abduction researcher Bud Hopkins, Shea remembered being too terrified to look at the object. As he continued driving, he saw 4 people at the side of the road, but they weren't people. The creatures were dressed in black, in a kind of plastic armor. Their faces were black. It looked as if they were wearing helmets with a line down the middle that came to a point. They actually looked like grasshoppers. They had long arms and bowed legs like a monkey's. 3 of the creatures were quite large. The 4th was small and was wearing a black silky suit with a zipper up the front. To Shea, this being also seemed older, ancient, actually. The witness remembered the mysterious light shining down from above as he stepped out of his car. The craft was nearby, and he could hear a low whir. Actually, there were 2 craft, the smaller one on the ground and a larger one hovering above. Later, inside one of the craft, Shea was put on a table and examined. Samples of various kinds were collected from his body. On October 3, 1954, at 18:45 hours in Rouen, France, between Roux and Quend on Road D27, René Coudet and B. Devoisin were riding bicycles with a 3rd witness when they saw an orange object shaped like a honeycomb on the road ahead of them. A strange man wearing a diving suit was standing close to it. When they got within 70 meters of it, the object took off very fast. On October 3, 1954, at 19:20 hours in Charennes, France, the crowd at a fair saw a luminous object arrive very fast in the sky, stop in flight, emit sparks, and come down to ground level. As witnesses rushed to the spot, it took off again. On October 3, 1954 at 21:10 hours, in Quend, France, less than 3 hours after Case 183, an orange object chased a car for 8 kilometers, then flew away toward the sea. Witness Georges Gallant, a butcher. On October 3, 1954 at 22:45 hours, in Ronsenac, France, a circular craft was seen by Jean Allaire between Montmirault and Villebois-la-Valette. It seemed to be gliding on the ground. It showed luminous spots and became completely illuminated when it took off. It was about 1.20 meters high. Grass was found flattened and scorched over an area of 7 meters across. On October 3, 1954 at 2300 hours, in Benay, France, near La Rochelle, Mr. and Mrs. Guillemonteau saw an object 2.5 meters high, 5 meters diameter, hover for several minutes, 1 meter above ground, then rise vertically. Oily marks were found on the spot. On October 4, 1954 in Limoges, France, an object was said to have landed in the yard of Mr. Montagne, a railroad employee. Now returning to some strange events in Ireland, in County Donegal, in Kerrytown, villagers often saw the shining apparition of the Blessed Virgin Mary above the cliffs, 11th January 1939 to 1946. 11th January 1939 to 1946? Well, that's what it says. Was it like every 11th of January for those years? I don't know. In Wascalluge, fishermen hooked something large, but saw only a yard of black, brownish-gray with dirty cream blotches, late 1940s. In West Donegal, 10 villages hit by freak lightning bolts over 2 years, with roofs stripped off, windows smashed, and televisions and telephones wrecked, 1983 to 84. In County Dublin, flying disc 10 inches in diameter landed and child was burned, November 1952. In Killikee, house haunted by ghostly figures and large black cat, late 1960s to early 1970s. In Monkstown, Dublin, ghostly singing heard, 1977. In County Galway, in Luge Abastili, long-necked black monster with looped body like gigantic snake seen, 1914. Also, man saw a huge eel-like creature crawling out of lake. In Luge Anna, lake monster reports one of a humped creature, 30 to 40 feet long. In Luge Dub, schoolteacher and son saw a monster that tried to get out of lake to attack boy. It had short, thick legs and hippo face, March 1962. In Luge Fada, people fishing saw monster with large open mouth, 1954. In Kilkerran Bay, sea monster with 6-foot neck and hairy brown body seen, 1910. In Luge Mosque, lake monster reports. In Mutton Island, lighthouse keeper shot and killed sea monster 48 feet long and 28 feet round the middle, which had been tearing fishermen's nets, 5th May 1935. In Luge Nahuin, lake monster reports. Search is unsuccessful. In Luge Chanakavir, Man saw long-necked animal with black foal by lake, which went into the water. 1955, also later sightings. Now in County Kerry, in Asti, 4 children saw life-size statues of Jesus and Mary in church moving. Jesus beckoned and Mary's eyes moved. 14th February 1985. In Luge Bran, black monster seen, 10 feet long, reptilian, and like a cross between giant seal and mythical dragon. Summer 1979, seen on shore by 14-year-old boy who said it had 4 short legs, 1940. In Loch lake monster reports. In County Limerick, between Ballingarry and Kilfinny, near Rothkiel, boy met and talked with fairies, 1938.
What the hell in God's name is going down here?
That was a public service announcement designed to scare the shit out.
February 9th at 12:14 p.m. Years ago, my spirit contacts told me that I should be very careful about where I allow myself to fall asleep, and I just read this little bit from the Charles Ledbetter book, The Inner Life. The temporary astral counterpart, formed during the absence of the real astral body, is thus an exact copy of it so far as arrangement is concerned, but it has no real connection with the physical body, and could never be used as a vehicle. It is constructed of any astral matter of the required kind that happens to be handy. It is merely a fortuitous concourse of atoms, and when the true astral body returns, it pushes out this other astral matter without the slightest opposition. This is one reason for the extreme care which ought to be exercised as to the surroundings in which we sleep. For if those surroundings are evil, astral matter of the most objectionable type may fill our physical bodies while we are away from them, leaving behind it an influence which cannot but react horribly upon real man when he returns. Undated entry. This morning, lying in bed, I began to fall asleep again, which would have been very bad for my energy body problems. I would have felt miserable all day. When I was jostled awake by someone outside my window yelling very loudly and urgently my name. Interestingly enough, it wasn't my birth name, it was a name I've taken on for my creative projects and for magic. I bolted out of bed and ran to the window, thinking that one of my neighbors was about to be murdered or their place was on fire, but I saw no one there. I then realized that it made no sense. No one here knows me by that name. I've only introduced myself to people by my birth name. I also found that my kitchen sink had been turned on. I know that it wasn't a dream effect because the yelling of my name continued even while I was up and looking out of the window. It scared the living hell out of me. For a while I was shaking and nauseous. An interesting side note is that I originally came up with a name for the game Knights of the Old Republic 2. I created it out of the air, so to speak. The next game I played with that name was Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion. In that game I chose to be male Dark Elf. Far into playing that game, I found out that that name is an accepted, canonized name for a Dark Elf male in that universe. Alright? I just looked up the name for the first time in my life, though I've been using it for over a decade, and found out that it means strong. Well, I can agree with that. That's not a terrible name to have.
He was abducted by aliens earlier this afternoon. That little girl got lost under the bed and she went into an alternate dimension.
I'm going to read some excerpts from the book The Cryptoterrestrials by Mac Tonnies. Filmmaker Mike McDonald reports the following encounter with the other. It's funny how some memories stick with you all your life while others are forgotten, only to resurface after being jogged back by something that happens in the present day. In the case of this experience, it's one of my earliest memories, and it has always been on my mind. I call it a memory because at the age of 47 there are very few instances in my first few years of life that I can recall with any clarity. Whether this memory is of a dream or an actual waking experience, I can't say. My intuition tells me that it was a dream experience, but one of those life-altering, never-to-be-forgotten experiences that many of us carry around in our conscious and subconscious minds for life. My guess is this memory is from sometime in the first 4 years of my life. It's very simple to recount, but has a deeply resonating emotional effect on me when I recall it. It is in full color. I'm standing in a cave. Sitting before me on a throne fashioned out of the rock is what I can only describe as a very large pansy flower. The kind of flower that looks like it has a face with large slanted eyes. I know, when I saw the communion book over 20 years ago, I almost had a cow. Although the flower creature did not speak to me, I could feel that it was communicating to me somehow in a form of extreme condescension and intelligence. Like it was implying to me that it was totally in command. Not necessarily in a malevolent way, but in a way of true authority. By my side was my father. He was extremely upset, terrorized, actually, and possibly even ashamed. This caused me much more grief than the attitude emanating from the flower being. I had the feeling that the flower being had my father completely exposed in some way. I can't really put my finger on it, but the general feeling I had was that my all-powerful father, the center of my 4 or 5 years old life, was shaken to the core, and this frightened me more than the flower being itself. I will never forget this dream, nor the feeling of complete helplessness that my father displayed. At the time, incidentally, he was a member of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The experience ends here. As I said, I shall never forget it. I have mentioned it to my father, but he has no recollection of anything like that. I wished I could correctly convey the attitude, for lack of a better term, that the pansy flower displayed. All-knowing, condescending, almost cruel, completely humorless, and even ruthless in terms of how it affected us. Needless to say, since then I have always tended to look at pansies with a measure of suspicion. Here's another one. A commenter on the Post-Human Blues blog left the following report. Lately I've been thinking about a strange encounter I had as a child that makes some sense to me within the framework of the cryptoterrestrial theory. I thought you might find it interesting. So here it goes. Cryptoterrestrial refers to the idea that the UFO beings are of this planet in some way and not from other planets. Okay. I'm guessing I was around 10 years old, so it was sometime in the early 1990s. I was sitting with my little brother and 3 friends on a street corner in suburban Port Chester, New York. Summertime. Just a bunch of children enjoying the warm weather, doing whatever it is children do. A man's voice suddenly began to speak in clear and polite diction from what seemed like immediately in front of us. I don't recall anything particularly strange about this voice, except for the fact that there did not seem to be any person attached to it. It's often said that children are naturally more open-minded than adults and therefore more perceptive to the supernatural. I think that as adults we expect to understand our surroundings. We assume that there is a comprehensible explanation for whatever occurs. As kids, the whole world seems very alien. We often don't understand why adults do what they do, or why nature does what it does. Sure, this disembodied voice struck me as odd, but then again so did thunder and lightning and grown-ups' taste for beer. I don't remember that any of us were afraid or even slightly uneasy. Naturally, we asked the stranger where he was. He told us not to worry about that, and to not bother looking because we wouldn't find him. He just wanted to ask us a few questions. Now here's where it all gets blurry. He couldn't have talked to us for more than a few minutes, but I honestly can't remember a single word from the rest of the conversation. I only have a vague recollection of how the tone of it all felt to me at the time. He struck me as a grown-up looking for clinical information, the way a good teacher or doctor might ask questions intelligible to a kid without sounding patronizingly childlike. When it was all over, I became determined to figure out the source of the voice. I didn't rule out that someone was pulling a prank on us, even though none of this seemed to strike me as funny. Like many other kids, I liked to play with walkie-talkies. Though the voice lacked the typical fuzziness of a walkie-talkie, I still began to wonder if there was some sort of device hidden somewhere nearby. There were no sewer grates around, no parked cars, just a road, some well-mowed lawns, and perhaps a couple small bushes. My friends and I went across the street and began rooting around every nook and cranny but came up empty-handed. Here's another excerpt from the book. When I was 17, I was working in a small convenience store when a woman came in to buy cigarettes. At first I didn't pay any attention to her until I saw her hand when she handed me the money. It was not like a normal human hand. This startled me, so I looked up and saw a very pale entity wearing a thin black coat, like a raincoat, with collar turned up to cover her neck, a heavy long-haired wig, and very large black glasses. This did not entirely hide her strange face. A very pointed chin, scant lip and nose. She did not speak, took her cigarettes and left. I was kind of stunned. Oddly, I cannot remember the details of her hand, though it was the first thing I noticed. Nor do I think she left in a car, which was odd since most patrons drove up to the store. It was somewhat isolated. Whether this entity is a gray or a hybrid, I can only guess. I have never seen what is described as a classic gray. Perhaps hybrid is most fitting, simply because there seems to be some variety of attributes associated with this general category. For example, that do not fit perfectly with the classic gray alien type, size of head being foremost. Some details that I do recall with some clarity. First, her skin. It was very pale, white with an almost bluish-gray tint to it, and of an unusually smooth texture. I have never seen anything like it before or since. I had previously seen an albino person. It was nothing like that. Her skin was not unpigmented, though there was an almost translucent quality to it. Secondly, her facial features. Though I could not see her eyes due to the large Jackie O-style sunglasses she wore, other aspects were evident. An unusually long pointy chin, exaggerated cheekbones out of proportion to the rest of the face, practically no lips, only enough to discern that there was any mouth. A nose that was almost not there. There was very little structure to it, a small bridge area and some structure around the nostrils but not much. Finally, her neck, though her coat collar was turned up, I could see some of the neck which was oddly thin. The wig, obviously such a long, thick dishwater blonde, made of cheap imitation hair easily obtainable at a Kmart in those days, seemed placed to hide other features of the head, so I cannot comment on these ears, shape of head, etc. It puzzles me why I cannot recall her hand, perhaps because it was what most startled me at first. The only thing I can relate to this lack of recall is a nasty car accident I had years later. Afterwards I completely blanked out the memory of the worst part of the accident, the part when it was occurring. I asked my doctor about this and was told that it was not uncommon for the human brain to forget traumatic or difficult events. I can only surmise the initial part of the encounter with the cigarette lady falls into this category. There were no other people in the store. I was alone. It was afternoon. The year of this encounter was 1974, possibly 75. I worked both summers between high school and college, and between my first and second years of college. But most likely 74. The location was an area south of St. Louis, Missouri. I felt no lingering psychological effect from this encounter that I'm aware of, other than extreme puzzlement and the blocked memory of her hand. As to whether this changed me, I don't know.
Time has come to see the world as it is.
I'm going to read some more excerpts from the book Passport to the Cosmos by John Mack. According to African lore, Credo Motwa says star people have come from the heavens in magic skyboats for thousands of years, but this was not widely known because UFO groups do not speak to black people. The black man, he complains, is ignored and despised, quote, ostracized from sitting in important fields of science. Even the great Zulu warrior King Shaka was kidnapped by the Mentendane. Ask the Pygmies, the Bushmen of the Kalahari, the Ovahimba of Namibia, or the tribespeople of Zaire, he urges. All will tell, he says, of the growing presence among us of what we in the West call alien beings. Like observers in the United States and other Western cultures, Credo speaks of spheres, bright blue bands of light, and unusual disc-shaped objects seen over Johannesburg and Mafeking. In 1995, he told us, a black farmer in Lesotho came across a disc-like object that had fallen out of the sky and was emitting tiny little balls of lightning all around its circumference. Credo links the Mentendane to the Wandinja, the sky gods of the Australian Aboriginals, which are depicted in cave drawings with startlingly large black eyes, and to ancient Sumerians, whose drawings show bald heads and faces with unusually large eyes, small chins, and rudimentary noses. He also relates them to other non-earthly creatures and events like Sasquatch sightings, animal mutilations resembling those documented in Western accounts, and the mysterious intricate crop circles seen in fields, especially in southern England. Credo himself has made many drawings and paintings of variously shaped spacecraft, most of which look familiar to anyone who has studied the subject carefully. According to Credo, his people regard the stars, those little things up there, with fear and awe. To them a star is even more important than the sun or the moon, for it is from the stars their forebears have taught that important knowledge, wisdom, and enlightenment come. The people of Botswana, for example, call a star Naledi, which means light of the spirit, and have carved in wood, painted on rock, or even scratched on metal, the so-called UFOs, the magical vehicles in which the Mentendane and the star gods of various tribes traveled. Unlike the Lakota Sioux, who believe they come from the Pleiades, or the Dogon of Central Africa, who tell of intelligent beings that have come to the earth from the star Sirius, the people of southern Africa are less explicit about from which star the UFOs come. Credo believes that extraterrestrial beings have covertly influenced and manipulated all human cultures and civilizations profoundly for hundreds, if not thousands of years, operating in the shadows. Warriors like the Maasai go into battle wearing cod pieces to protect their genitals from the Mentendane, who might otherwise drain their semen, and women wear certain ornaments to protect themselves from being sexually molested by them. From the art and oral traditions of various African tribes and from his own experiences, Credo has concluded that some of these creatures, especially the Mentendane, share the earth with us. They need us, they use us, they harvest things from us, but he is not altogether sure why. According to Credo, the Mentendane have caused wars and other terrible cruelties and have manufactured diseases to destroy human beings or to test our resistance to various bacterial strains. But they have also had a positive influence and done helpful things. They taught the Zulus how to drill through stone and the Egyptians to cut the great stone with which they made the pyramids. When smallpox threatened to wipe out the Zulu tribes, quote, the star people told our people what to do to protect themselves. And during a terrible famine, when crops were failing and hundreds were dying, a race of Mentendane-like creatures, only taller, came out of the sky and taught women how to grind and cook the poisonous cassava root to render it edible and palatable to human beings. Although Credo is frustrated that people in the West do not accept the reality of these beings and that they interfere with human destiny, he is quite astute about the reasons for this resentment. Quote, human beings are subconsciously aware of the danger that we are all in, he told us, but many of them are refusing to accept this truth. You will find many cultures afraid of talking to you about such things, he said toward the end of our first meeting. Why? Look, sir, a creature that can go through walls, a creature that can come up from my bed and close to me and smile at me, a creature that can play with my genitals even though I have every door locked, a creature furthermore that can leave visible scratches on my body to prove to me that it has been there. His sentence trails off. Let me tell you, Dr. Mack, Credo said in our next meeting, that very often when you see these things, especially if you are an educated and Christian person, your mind rejects what you see. Your mind refuses to accept what you see. Your mind will not recognize what you see. I've seen it happen to thousands of black people and white people. Nevertheless, Credo insisted, people should stop obscuring the facts. These are real beings. They should be communicated with. There are many legends and stories in Africa, Credo told us, concerning UFOs and various creatures that come with them from the stars. For the people of Africa, he told Stephen Larson, the skies are full of life. Yes, even the origin of life can be attributed to the stars. Before they knew of airplanes, he said, African tribespeople called UFOs swings, as the nearest thing they knew to something a human being could fly in was a swing suspended from the branch of a tree. People's lives, Credo said, have been changed by entities that were not of this world. Credo told us of the appearance and habits of about 8 or 10 sorts of creatures thought to come from the stars. These creatures, he has said, watch over us with curiosity, quote, actually regulating human progress for some reason known only to themselves. All over South Africa, he said, you find stories of these extraterrestrial visitors. The creatures, each of which he named, included tall blonde beings that were knowledge givers, hairy creatures, the puana, that give children scratches that never become septic, an entity with a very large head, a naturally pink skin, and a long male organ, and creatures that wore a helmet and armor to protect them in this world. In olden days, Credo told us, his people accepted these creatures and did not regard them as outside the miracle of this earth. Credo recalls that his mother used to urinate into a clay chamber pot and wash her children's scratches from the puwawa with her urine to exorcise the spirit of this creature. The most feared and apparently the most important for Africans are the Matendane, or sky monkeys, which, as we have seen, are thought to be able to impregnate women. Credo told Stephen Larson that women throughout Africa over several centuries have told of being fertilized by strange creatures from somewhere. The Matendane, he says, inflict pain, quote, torture us like the African secret police, and smell hideously. The last thing Credo told us in our first meeting was that when he drew a picture of Matendane for his mother, she cried and corrected the drawing slightly, for she had seen such a creature herself in 1918. Nevertheless, the Matendane, Credo told us with some irony, are thought of by some Africans as gods who honor people by taking things from them to places that we don't know. When people are captured by the Matendane, he said, it is thought to be because they have done something wrong, and the gods want to take out the evil spirits in a very painful way. Injuries from these encounters, according to Credo, are called god injuries. Yet in his angry moments of recollection, he rejects this notion. Gods, he declares, wouldn't stick things into people and injure and traumatize them. Gods do not need the organs of innocent women to put unknown fetuses inside them. Credo himself has had many sightings of UFOs and says that over Mafeking, they are seen every month by hundreds of people. He scoffs at the American Air Force's stories of weather balloons. Quote, a weather balloon doesn't have portholes that are visible through a powerful pair of binoculars, he said to us. Except for the childhood companions who helped him with his schoolwork, Credo's encounters with the occupants of such craft have been largely unpleasant, if not traumatic. He holds extraterrestrial beings responsible for ruining his love affairs, spoiling his marriages, and damaging his penis. At the same time, as we have seen, they are sources of vital knowledge, have given him powerful skills, and provide important warnings to the human species which he urgently believes we should heed. One creature, which he calls the string skirt sister, because it wears a skirt made of strings, has been with him since he was a baby. In the Catholic world in which he was brought up, such beings were either angels or demons. Quote, so I naturally believed that this creature was my guardian angel. This being, he told us, has reddish skin, intense eyebrows, and unnaturally widened eyes, and speaks through a hole in its throat. Sometimes it wears a fish-shaped helmet with a crest on it. The same being also haunted his aunt Mina, who said to Credo, this is no devil, and told him that hundreds of Sangomas and healers in Zululand were bothered and controlled by this creature. Typically, Credo said, when a Sangoma has terrible dreams and becomes sick with the healer's illness, the string skirt sister will lead the sufferer underground where he will see all kinds of amazing and fearful things. She has also given him knowledge, most of which has been useless to him, but it includes the capacity to foretell the future accurately. It is this being, Credo says, with some bitterness, that caused him to end his dreams of being a schoolteacher and to concentrate on preserving his people's culture. Quote, I didn't want to build villages in various parts of Africa, but she tells me to do that. If he does not obey her, he said, she screams and cries night after night after night. This being is more me than I am me, Credo declared. In Song of the Stars, Credo describes an important UFO encounter that occurred when he was about 30. He was called to a large village in Botswana where a falling star had been seen. The trees and brush had been burned as if by a fire, and Credo and others who came with him saw a round object the size of a large truck floating in the air. It lit up the surrounding trees, which had been scorched by the fire. Two creatures, jumping and running rather like children and wearing dark garments, got into the craft and it just took off and disappeared. This description is similar to the one given to us by the children at the aerial school. The creatures left behind some white rubbish that crumpled like bone turning into ash. According to African tradition, Credo said, such material should not be touched because it can cause burning and blistering of the hands, hair to fall out, and eventual death. The most important encounter with humanoid beings that Credo has experienced occurred in 1958, when he was still learning to be a Sangoma. He has summarized this event in Song of the Stars. He talked about the incident to me in great detail and with an intense combination of emotions which included shame, anger, and a kind of awe. He was also clearly eager that I tell of such things back in my home, but as he told the story once again, he felt dirty and ashamed. The incident occurred in the sacred Inyangani Mountains in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, where he was working with a traditional healer, a Mrs. Zamoya, digging for special herbs that are used to treat backache. This is how Credo began his account. Now, it was an ordinary day, sir. I loved being alone in the bush. I loved the smell of the animals, the smell of the trees, the sound of the birds, and I was just digging away when, all of a sudden, I was aware of this strange silence that had fallen around. This silence lasted only a few moments. Then, all around me, there was a blue smoke that obscured the landscape. I could no longer see the trees so well. I could no longer hear the birds. I could no longer feel the heat of the sun. One minute I was standing there looking stupid and feeling even stupider, when I was suddenly in a place made of iron. It was sort of round like a water tank lying on its side. Credo found he had no clothes on, and his body now was on a table that seemed to fit his contours. Several times he spoke to us of a horrible smell, variously described as like an electrical smell mixed with a chemical of some kind, a stink of copper and rotten fish. He was terrified, was urinating like nobody's business, and struggled to get off the table. But except for slight movement on his eyes, he was completely paralyzed. Credo's asthmatic condition made it especially difficult to breathe. Around him were 6 or more small doll-like beings about 3 feet tall with huge black eyes, like nothing on earth, he said. They had very small jaws, and their faces were like white clay with a pinkish tinge. The skin of their bodies seemed to be shiny, as if covered with oil, or the texture and feel of a little reptile. For noses, the beings had only small nostril holes, and the mouths were like a razor cut with no lips. They had no hair or ears, and 2, 3, or 4 long, very thin fingers that appeared to Credo to have one more joint than a human's. They were all wearing seamless grayish-silver, shiny, crackly uniform, and a round cap that, he said, made them look like Japanese soldiers in the Second World War. The beings staggered about as if they were powered by batteries, or like chickens with broken legs. The place was illuminated by a strange light that did not seem to Credo to be electrical. A slightly bigger creature with a wrinkled face, wearing a kind of brown overall, whom Credo sensed was a female, seemed to be in charge and stood very close to his head. She had no breasts and only the slightest swell of hips, and the other seemed to be afraid of her. There was a blue curtain around him, but the creature seemed to be able to walk right through it as they approached. Credo tried to scream, but the brown lady put her hand over his mouth and patted it. Her thoughts were somewhere else. It was as if I didn't exist, he said. None of the beings said anything to him. One of them stabbed a sort of pipe into his thigh, and something was stuck in his nose that seemed to cause a kind of explosion in his head. Credo compared the pain and fear to rape experiences he had undergone, but this, he said, was much worse. Normally, he said, he is able to dissociate when he is so frightened, to split his consciousness from his body. Quote, but on that table, that thing never happened. It seems like there was a big witchcraft on me, a terrible witchcraft. As Credo was lying on the table in pain, a quite human-looking white woman who was wearing no clothes came up to him. But her limbs were too short for her body, her skin seemed polished, and, quote, she looked more like a doll than these creatures looked like dolls. This creature looked and felt to him utterly unnatural. She touched his face and aroused him with her hand. Then she climbed over him like a crazy Zulu girl, he said, but it was not like making love to a real woman. For then you feel the beat of her veins and arteries, you feel the warmth of her, you feel the heat and the smell, but this creature had none of these things. It was as cold as if you were making love to a dead body, sir, as cold as if you were making love to a machine. Her large eyes did not blink, and she felt as if she had no bones. The most frightening part of all was that the creature seemed to attach something to his penis that caused him to ejaculate too much. After this, the female being went away, and Credo did not see her again. While he was still in intense pain, quote, these creatures pushed me off the table. It was like pulling a goat, he said. His penis was burning as if I had put it in scalding water. Then one of the beings showed him something strange that even now, doctor, still is haunting my dreams, he said, and I shall remember it to the day I die. A big round bottle without a neck and filled with a pinkish liquid was suspended somehow from a wall, and inside of it was a creature, swimming like a frog, that Credo felt certain was an unborn human baby. He recalled that he had also seen other human beings being tortured by other Mantindane exactly as I was. In the next moment, Credo found himself once again in the bush, and through a great dullness of the brain, he gradually became aware of things that were wrong. His trousers and shirt were torn, and his mining boots, with heavy nails good for kicking crocodiles if a crocodile catches you by the neck, were gone. His body was covered with gray dust, and he smelled awful, like in that stinking place. Credo followed a track that led to a village, and when he finally made contact, he asked for Mrs. Zamoya. He was shocked when he was told that he had been missing for 3 days. He continued to feel pain in his thigh, nose, and man-thing, lost strength, and fell down. He was then taken to Mrs. Zamoya's place and bathed from head to toe. She told him that he had been caught by the god of the mountains. Credo said that tiny droplets of blood were oozing from pores in his skin, which was quite itchy. He showed me a nearly half-inch scoop mark in his thigh, which he attributed to this experience. Credo stayed in the village for several days to recover and was bathed every day. Villagers found his boots in the bush, but curiously they were still laced. Quote, as if somebody or something had pulled me out of my boots without unlacing them. He felt deathly ill and in a state that he describes as very close to madness. He was taken by Mrs. Zamoya to her Solace mission in western Rhodesia, where it took him several months to recover. Most horrifying of all to him, skin started to peel off his penis, which developed sores and became an ugly pink. Ugh. Traces of this condition remained, which Credo says is why his first wife left him. Mrs. Zamoya took Credo to speak with several other people who had had similar experiences and injuries. In Francistown, an old man told him that what had happened to him was very common in that region, but that one should talk about it only to others who had had a similar god injury. Credo was asked if he had done anything wrong or broken any taboos that might account for this misfortune, but he had never stolen from anyone, lied to his mother, or done anything he could recall that might make the gods angry. Another explanation offered for his illness was that he might have eaten the sacred flesh of a sky monkey, which was said to cause violent symptoms. But Credo said that he knew of people who had never eaten Mantindane flesh but had had more horrific experiences than his own. In the end, he is left without any convincing explanation for his encounters with the Mentendane. Credo told us of one other important encounter he had had with the Mentendane. It occurred after the Soweto riots in 1976. A mob attacked him because of a newspaper article falsely alleging that he had said that the army should be brought in to kill school children. He was stabbed many times and was severely injured. Credo was taken by friends to a farm in Natal province to recover and also to avoid professional killers who, he says, were sent to look for him in his home or the hospital to really finish me off. The night when Credo was beginning to recover from these terrible injuries, he smelled the same horrible smell as he had during the 1958 incident. Although the door to his hut was locked, he saw a single Mentendane standing by his bed, quote, the same little bloody bastard, still female, in the brown suit. Something in the creature's eyes, dry, unmoving, with a vicious emptiness, made her look very old, and she had a smell of hundreds of years. She moved like floating on water, or like a ballerina very slowly. She looked down on him, not saying anything, and again I was asleep by witchcraft. Again I could not move. Then the being touched the plaster cast that was on Credo's hand, took the blanket off his body, and started looking at my man-thing again. He wanted to shout angrily, "You're wasting your time, you little bitch!" But his lips were numb. Then suddenly, in what seemed to Credo like a cruel, brutal action, the creature ripped the bandage off his badly wounded right hand, causing blood to come from it. She seemed frightened in a human sort of way, as if she were afraid of contacting the blood directly. Then she went right through the mud wall of the hut, taking with her the bandage, which, Credo said, was found still bloody and full of medicine some distance from the hut. The people who assaulted him, Credo told us, had wanted to cut off 2 of his fingers so that, as an artist, he would not be able to paint again. He had been given emergency treatment by a Dr. Goldberg in Soweto, who told him that he had almost lost the hand and was concerned that the wound might kill him of blood poisoning. But after the Mentendane ripped off the bandage, the hand healed in 2 days, and he never had to put it on again. Credo and his wife found this very strange, for we had not expected this thing. I was utterly amazed. In summary, although he continues to feel rage, shame, and the residua of his traumatization by the Mentendane, Credo's attitude toward them remains ambivalent and contradictory. Once a Mentendane has dealt with you, he says, you become afraid of making love to a woman. The moment your semen comes out, you recall that terrible day, and something becomes rather flat in you at night. These beings scar you for the rest of your life. You're not able to relate properly to ordinary human beings after they have had a session with you. Yet, not without some sympathy, he observes that these creatures are moved by a desperate need. White people in South Africa call these beings aliens, Credo said. We don't call them that. They are part of us, part of our lives. These beings are not cold, he concluded in our first meeting. It's only that they've got feelings that we don't even imagine. Credo's dark interpretation of the Mentendane, however valid, seems to relate to his worldview, which has become more negative even in the short time I have known him, as his sicknesses and persecutions have increased under black rule. Quote, these creatures want sick, impotent, debilitated, asthmatic, diabetic things like me to change the course of human history, he says bitterly. Furthermore, as we have seen, Credo attributes to humanoid beings vital knowledge and skills that he possesses, the healing of near-fatal wounds, and essential warnings about the threat to the Earth from environmental destruction. The Mentendane are solvers of great problems, he concedes, in whatever bloody world they live in. Their technology may be several million years ahead of us. He urges Americans to stop arguing about whether these phenomena are real, and enjoins us all to swim against the tide of anger in the waves of ignorance, and bring the knowledge of Africa back to white people in the West. Why aren't scientists testing these things, he asked, instead of saying it's all nonsense, instead of saying that abduction experiences are all mad? Credo, like other indigenous people with whom I have discussed these matters, does not sharply distinguish material or literal reality from mythic truths. This has made it particularly difficult for me to sort out what he may have actually experienced and what is part of African legend. His 1958 abduction experience, for example, has many elements that are familiar to us from American studies. But when he speaks of Africans becoming poisoned by eating the flesh of the Mentendane, or the string skirt sister who takes people underground, we are on unfamiliar ground. Certain ideas of his, like the dominant role of the Mentendane and other extraterrestrial or star beings in human cultural history, seem related to tribal myth and legend. At a personal level, Credo is a superb storyteller, and his accounts may contain exaggerations and hyperbole. In addition, Credo's familiarity with Western culture and ufology, and perhaps his wish, consciously or unconsciously, to provide me with information that he would know I would appreciate, may have led him to include elements from this knowledge in his account. In trying to differentiate his actually remembered experiences from these possible embellishments or distortions, I have tended to rely on the powerful emotions of shame, embarrassment, and anger that seemed altogether authentic, appropriate to what he was telling me, and similar to what experiencers in Western societies have demonstrated. When I asked Credo why he thought there had been such resistance in the West to acknowledge the existence of these beings, he replied, Dr. Mack, I'm going to be very brutal in answering this question. The entire Western civilization is based upon a blatant lie. The lie that we human beings are the cocks of the walk in this world. The lie that we human beings are the highest of all forms in this world, that we are alone, and that beyond us there is nothing. He spoke, too, of the dictatorial religious falsehood that there can be no other godlike beings but the God of the Bible. Like Sequoia, he experiences a cosmos that contains many, many great beings, some of which we don't even remotely dream about. Credo speculated that if we were to announce to the world that the aliens are here, people would look behind governmental facades of power and challenge the corruption, the governmental lies, and the rotten industrial systems. In spite of his negative view of the dangerous nature and intent of the Mentendane, Credo says he would gladly welcome a Mentendane government over us. In fact, I personally believe it, he said. It would be the best thing that ever happened to the human race. Such a government would really bring us to our senses. That government would show us what real oppression is. For the human race, he continued, is shamefully disunited and not capable of bringing our collective energy to bear upon the serious problems that we face. If we had a common enemy, a common source of fear, he suggests, then we would unite. All the things that divide us would fall away under a common danger. My work with Bernardo, Sequoia, Credo, and other indigenous people has been especially helpful in enabling me to see that the abduction phenomenon is not simply an American or Western story. Although there are obvious differences, especially in the way various cultures interpret the experiences, some of the features of these shamans' encounters are familiar to students of the abduction phenomenon in the West. Credo's abduction in particular contains most of the familiar or classic traumatic, intrusive, and sexual elements. There are obvious differences in the experiences of these three men. Credo's most fully reported abduction, for example, was nasty and hurtful, while Sequoia's for the most part was enlightening and inspiring, directed by the spirit guides who have always been with him. These differences are consistent with the contrasting worldviews of the two men. Sequoia accepting all experience as welcome teachings of the Creator, Credo more bitterly about his fate, the being's purposes, and the works of God. But there are also important features that the experiences of the three men have in common. Each has encountered beings that resemble, more or less, the gray aliens known to us in the United States and in other Western countries. None of them has a basic ontological problem with the encounters. They are consistent with their respective worldviews. For in their cultures, the universe is governed by unseen forces and filled with beings that are, most of the time, invisible, but that can, as in the case of the Mentendane and Akuyas, take material form. As Sequoia said, the extraterrestrials are just another face of spirit. All three of these men have had a Christian as well as a native upbringing. Each is playing an important role in building bridges that connect indigenous and white cultures, and the encounters have had a part in their education and transformation. Each is a teacher in both worlds. The encounters have deeply affected each of them, although in different ways. Bernardo was shaken to learn of beings who may be related to the beginnings of his people, but whose place of origin cannot be located in space and time. For Sequoia, the encounters showed him the paradise-like possibilities of human life in the cosmos, for which, at the time of his experience, he felt unready. Credo has been physically and emotionally wounded by his encounters, but attributes knowledge and healing power to the Mentendane. The most important lesson for me and for our society, I think, lies in the fact that these men corroborate the reality of the abduction phenomenon. They make clear that it is not simply the product of the Western imagination or our interest in aerospace technology, and that elements of the phenomenon may be universal, that is, not entirely culture-dependent. Bernardo, Sequoia, and Credo are all eager to tell me their stories, partly so that they may understand and integrate their own experiences, but also that I may bring this knowledge to my culture, which is so skeptical of anything that cannot be proven in material terms. Credo in particular is eager for me to bring the Mentendane's warnings about the perilous state of the Earth to my society. He wants this subject studied and urges scientists and others to stop arguing about whether this phenomenon, which he says is so well known in Africa, is or is not real. Time is too short for that, he believes. These shamans see the pain and suffering of their crises, initiations, and other life experiences as essential dimensions of learning and growth. Western society, however, tends to see pain and suffering mainly as obstacles to be removed on the way to well-being. I have found the shamanic perspective helpful in working with abductees in our culture. As artist and student of shamanism Andrea Pritchard wrote to me, this difference is one reason why the abductees feel more comfortable in the presence of a shaman than in the presence of most therapists. In shamanism, everyone's path is unique.
Science can explain everything if we look hard enough.
Shut up, science bitch.
Nothing's true. Everything's real. Not only is he like ruining my life, but with all this God shit that he's into, he could be ruining my afterlife.
It's a sort of interdimensional vagina that somehow appears. I can interact with it.
Fabric of the entire universe could be torn apart.
I know my mind is changing. I'm already too far